Chief, you know what I'm
We
interested
can
in?
never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied.
They attack the victim, and then the criminal who attacked the victim accuses the victim of attacking him. This is American justice. This is American democracy. And those of you who are familiar with it know that in America, democracy is hypocrisy.
You have a choice. Violence to defend yourself, you know what I'm saying? Turn the other cheek, or wait for the news cameras to come and talk about it.
Now is the time to plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize. It is time to beat up prosecutors you don't like at the voting. It is time to hold mayoral officers accountable, chiefs and deputy chiefs. I woke up wanting to see the world burn down yesterday. I'm tired of seeing black men die. He casually put his knee on a human being's neck for 9 minutes as he died like a zebra in the clutch of a lion's jaw. And we watch it like murder porn over and over again. So that's why children are burned to the ground. They don't know what else to do. And it is the responsibility of us to make this better right now. We don't want to see one officer charged. We want to see 4 officers prosecuted and sentenced. We don't want to see targets burned. We want to see the system that sets up for systemic racism burnt to the ground. And as I sit here in Georgia, home of Stevens, Georgia, former vice president of the Confederacy, white man said that fundamental law stated that whites were naturally the superior race, and the Confederacy was built on a cornerstone. It's called a cornerstone speech. Look it up. The cornerstone speech that blacks would always be subordinate. That officer believed that speech because he killed that man like an animal. When a man yells for his mother in the arresting pain and she's dead, he is essentially yelling, please God, don't let it happen to me. You watch this. So my question for us on the other side of this camera is, after it burns, will we be left charred, or will we rise like a phoenix out of the ashes that Atlanta has always done? Will we use this as a moment to say that we will not do what other cities have done, and in fact we will get better than we've been? We got good enough to destroy cash funds. You don't have to worry about going to jail for something petty. We got smart enough to decriminalize marijuana. How smart are we going to be in the next 15 or 20 years to keep us ahead of this curve? So you sit in your homes tonight instead of burning your homes to the ground. You will have time to properly plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize in an effective way. And 2 of the most effective ways is first taking your butt to the computer and making sure you fill out your sentences so that people know who you are and where you are. The next thing is making sure you exercise your political bully power and going to local elections and beating up the politicians that you don't like. What else we got? We lose an ability to plot, to plan, to strategize, to organize, and to properly mobilize. I want you to go home. I want you to talk to 10 of your friends. I want you guys to come up with a real solution. We need to get ahead of it. That's my recommendation to my mayor and my chief. Let's get a review, or let's get ahead of it, and let's give them power. We don't need an officer that makes a mistake once, twice, 3 times, and finally he kills a boy on national TV, and the next thing you know, the country is burning down. We don't need a dumbass president repeating what segregation is said. You start looting, we start shooting. But the problem is some officers black and some people gonna shoot back. And that's not good for our community either. I love and respect you all. I hope that we find a way out of it, because I don't have the answers, but I do know we must plot, we must plan, we must strategize, organize, and mobilize. Thank you for
Southwest. Right?
Hey everyone, I am Brooke, the National Plus Coalition.
My
And I
plant
just
leaves
want
at
to thank
5.
everyone for tuning in all week
My
for
plant
our
leaves at
Revival for Justice event.
My
And
business
I
leaves at 3
also
p.m.
just want to say thank you to all of our speakers and hosts that we've had all week. Tonight, we're going to be talking about solutions. And we have JoJo from the Black Lives Matter, Mississippi. We also have Mr. James Lickett. We have Chief Gordon. And we also have Miss Sarah Jane from the Parchment Project. I just want to start it out with just telling a little bit of not my personal experience with the police, but as a mother, my experience with the police. So my son is 14 years old, and I'm not excusing their behavior because what they did was stupid and irresponsible, but my 14-year-old son and his 15-year-old friend took my car at night, and the police got behind them. The boys got scared, and they decided they were going to do as they do in the TV and go on a high-speed chase. So they took the police on a chase. There had just been a shooting in an area nearby. So I believe the police thought they might have been the shooters. Well, they call me and they tell me that they're running from the police. I'm trying to get them to stop. Well, the officer took his car and got right in front of my son. Well, my son's friend who was driving, and hit my son and his friend head on. Mind you, I'm on the phone, so I'm hearing all of this. They jumped out the car. They're laying on the ground. And
I'm not scared.
they're laying on the ground on their stomach with their hands behind their back. I hear my son saying that he's only 14 and that he's not resisting. I hear his friend crying, saying, "Why do you have a gun to the back of his head?" The officer literally put a gun to the back of my son's head, like was holding a gun to his head. They picked up his friend who was driving off the ground and body slammed him 2 times. Both the boys walked away with no charges. They were never detained. They never were taken into custody. They were released from the scene. But yet now my son and his friend are both traumatized by what they did. There's actually a picture of the car where they hit head on. Maria, can you put it up? And I actually did not know, but Chief Gordon was telling me that that's actually now not a proper police procedure. I thought that was okay, but according to what he told me, it's not. And so I was actually just wanting to see if he could start us out with explaining why that's actual excessive force and how, like, what could be done different with this precinct that did things this way.
Well, thank you, Brooke. Looking at different situations and incidents that happen, one of the things we have to do is look at them from the standpoint of use of force. Almost everything that we have a problem with or that comes to us is a use of force issue. Under use of force, there's 2 main sections to that. One is use of force, the other is deadly force. So it's something is either less lethal, less than lethal, you hear it both ways, or deadly force. The rules are different for the 2 of those, but both of them come under the 4th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And the Supreme Court of the United States interprets that and puts it out. There are several court cases that came out in 1988 and 1989, basically, are the last major ones that have to do with use of force. When it comes to deadly force, which the Supreme Court has said constitutes from the use of a motor vehicle against anybody else. In other words, if I use a motor vehicle, a moving motor vehicle, to stop another motor vehicle or people or whatever, then that's a use of deadly force, because the use of a motor vehicle in that way can be construed as deadly force. Of course, it can result in death or great bodily harm, which is the definition of deadly force. what those guys did there, well, first, let me say a disclaimer is I don't know the department. I don't know the incident other than what Brooke has told me. I don't know what they knew prior to doing what they did. But if we presume that they had information about a drive-by shooting, if we presume that they believe that the people in the vehicle may have been involved in that, then the possibility of deadly force comes up if it presents itself. If it never presents itself, then I can't use deadly force against a deadly force that wasn't there. It has to be there in order for me to react to it. So by using a motor vehicle against somebody else, I am using deadly force. That is a use of deadly force. There's only one other thing that somebody can do, which in and of itself, the Supreme Court has said is deadly force, and that is pointing a gun at somebody. I don't have to fire it. I just have to point it at them, and that's deadly force. That is deploying deadly force. Nothing else in and of itself, but the use of that motor vehicle is deadly force. That's what they did there, was presenting deadly force. Now, both legally and tactically, I would question what they did there, because tactically there are many more techniques currently that are more modern or more contemporary for them. And obviously that's not the forum that we're here in. But legally, I think the use of force there for the motor vehicle was problematic. Now, you want me to go on with the other, with the gun in the back and the body slamming, Brooke?
Yes. And then if we can just talk about how we can go into like solutions, how the precinct could do better, what
Sure.
they could implement.
And again, looking at it from a use of force standpoint, what the officer did was approach a 14-year-old boy who's on the ground, ostensibly unarmed. Now, they can't tell everything, but they don't see any weapons. There are no weapons there. And the boy is being cooperative, face down on the ground. You can see his hands. And in fact, he has discarded a cell phone, which was previously in the hand, and he's kicked that away. The officer then takes his service weapon and places the weapon against the back of the boy's head, contacting it to his head, so that the boy can feel the barrel of that gun against his head. Now, to me, that is problematic. It is, and I'll go so far as to say it's wrong. It's simply wrong on several levels. One is it's legally improper, and that's the main thing, is it's legally improper because it does not meet the requirements of use of force. This is the deployment of deadly force. This is by pointing a gun at somebody else, and they may very well be able to do that with the information of the shooting they had and the high-speed chase they had. They have the ability there to point the weapon at somebody and tell them to get on the ground or put their hands behind their head or something like that is fine. To approach somebody on the ground and place a weapon, muzzle end first with the barrel against the back of their head, is something that is intended to terrorize the 14-year-old boy on the ground. The officer has no constitutional right, nor does he have any reason at that point to do anything like that. So I consider that both constitutionally and tactically deficient, is what we would say there. It's wrong, simply wrong. The other boy, here you have another 15-year-old boy who is also cooperating, face down on the ground, who orally, verbally berates the officers a little bit because now he's got his muzzle at the back of his head. So to silence him, to again terrorize him, and to retaliate against him, the officers take the 15-year-old boy, lift him up off the ground, and body slam him back down on the ground. Again, that action, which is aggravated assault, it's battery, by grabbing somebody and body slamming them on the ground, you, sir, are armed. You are in control of the situation, and you have people who are cooperating with you. Now, to use force against anyone there, especially if they're being verbal, I have no right to use force against anybody who's just being verbal, first of all. The Supreme Court has already said you have a right to say whatever you want to say. There is such a thing as fighting words or threatening words that can provoke action. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is a 14-year-old boy and a 15-year-old boy with a whole bunch of cops around there. There are at least 6 police cars chasing them. That means there's at least 6 police officers out there around these 2 guys. That meets their tactical advantage of 3-1, by the way. That's proper, the number of people. The action against the boys, in my mind, in my assessment, would be both constitutionally and tactically deficient. And I believe the 2 actions are excessive use of force. That leads us into solutions then from where we've been this week. We've talked about
Sounds like it.
We've talked about several issues throughout the week. And the first thing that I would like to offer is that one of the things that I think we've come across typically is that we have a whole lot of police departments out there, 20,000 of them, that have different policies. And there needs to be a requirement, I think a statutory requirement, that says every police department, every sheriff's department must be accredited and have the same core of policies, something like CALEA has, so that we have reasonable policies out there for every department. And with that, I'll open it and ask if there's any response to that. Anybody else on policies?
I'm sorry. I just want to say this. I missed somebody when I did introductions earlier. We also have Sonia Jones from the Sony Show.
Hello, everybody.
So Jojo, I'm just curious, you're in Mississippi, the same state I'm in. Like, what do you think? What do you think needs to change within the policies of our police precincts?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that last part. What was that you asked again?
I said, since we're both like in Mississippi, what do you think needs to change within the police, the police precincts here in Mississippi with their policies? Because this happening to my son, my son thankfully walked away, but there's so many here that don't.
Far, I mean, first off, from my perspective, speaking on behalf of me, I think, and I heard the chief say this is that, and not only the chief, but I've heard this a lot, especially
You're breaking up.
when dealing with policing and Black communities, people of color communities, is that we often talk about a lot of these things, right? But there's typically not a follow through action on developing any type of intervention plan or method to solve these problems. We often have, that's the first step, is having meetings to have meetings
You're breaking
to talk
up.
about. We should implement maybe policies, programs, or safe practices when dealing with engagement of policing and people in the community, regardless of whatever community, especially those who are marginalized. But definitely looking at the policy, it really goes back to voting. Knowing that, specifically speaking, geared toward a policy, I think I can say is that I'm actually learning a lot more about this, along with quite a few individuals, as we protest for LaMelo Parker.
You're breaking up,
the infant baby that
JoJo.
was killed by police. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay, it's freezing.
Go ahead, James, if you had something to say.
JoJo seems to be having problems. There are bills that are going to the George Floyd bill.
You're breaking up.
That's one that would help bring
You're breaking up.
uniformity, right, Chief? Wouldn't that help bring more uniformity nationwide? I think we're all breaking up a little bit here. And that's what we need. Those are the things we need to do. We have to watch the senators, make sure they get it through. And it seems like the Republicans keep stalling these things. So they need to be gotten out of there. Stop the stall. And Biden can't do it all. We have to assist him in what he needs to do to get these things done. And that would bring more uniformity nationwide to all the different police stations and stuff like that. That's one answer. Instead of trying to do it individually, you know what I'm saying? From state to state and stuff like that. Bring federal law in there to make it better for everyone.
If I may, a word about the federal law.
Chief, you what do you think about that?
I don't disagree with you, James, but a point about the federal law. When you start to talk about federal law for law enforcement, you run into two problems that we'll be fighting. The first is a states' right issue that people will come at us and say constitutionally, the states have the right to do this. It's not a federal prerogative. But the second issue, and probably the more important one, is there's a real strong fear out there that if we go into a federal regulatory stance on it, that we're going toward a federal police, a national police. There's a real fear that the police could become federalized, and that then could get into the, Nazi Gestapo type of thing with the national police. So I agree with what you're saying, is that if we could get an umbrella of regulations, policy, laws to follow everything and to go over everything, that would be helpful. One of the issues there from individuals, of course, is money. It costs money for departments and cities to be able to comply with regulations. Do you want us to go ahead and carry on with this, or go somewhere else?
Chief, if I could share an experience as a first responder in regards to can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yes.
So
yes,
I had an experience as a first responder who responded to a call where a police officer had gotten himself involved in a high-speed chase. And unfortunately, the high-speed chase was on a very rainy day, and the police officer hydroplaned and hit a woman, an innocent woman on her way to work. She hit her head. He hit her head on. I can tell you today, this happened a few years ago, and it's still very traumatic for me as a first responder to have responded to the scene. She did make it. She's alive, but she will never be able to walk without assisted devices ever again. And I actually had gotten him because I was the responding EMT firefighter to that scene. I had gotten subpoenaed to go to court to testify in the civil suit, which was not a very easy thing to do. Coming from a smaller community in upstate New York, firefighters, EMTs work very closely with the police officers. I knew this man, and it was not very easy, but I was able to, assess the situation that I was in and provide the best testimony I could, which is never easy when, there's this unwritten rule that we as first responders stick together. And I was provided a lot of support at that time by my superiors. And like I said, I provided details of what had happened, which was, the best truth that I could possibly give, which, and like I said, this woman will never be able to walk again without assisted devices. That could have happened. That could have happened in Brooke's situation with her son and his friend, where the high speed chase resulted in the head-on collision. Somebody could have gotten seriously hurt, if not died in the accident. Luckily that didn't happen, but we are still dealing with a couple youth who are now traumatized by this situation. With everything else going on in the news, it doesn't help. At the time that I was going through this with my particular situation, it was brought to light that there are more policies being put in place that officers, rather than engaging in a high-speed chase, because it does hurt civilians and those not involved in the incident, that they radio ahead and they strategically place their officers with the spike strips in the appropriate places and handle these situations safer. Chief, what do you know about that as a policy as a situation that might help, you know, with this excessive use of force?
You know, the decision to pursue or not to pursue, and I've had that hundreds of times in my career, is a tough one, because the officers have to consider first, what is the reason for the chase? Is it simply that I wanted to stop this guy for a traffic violation and then go on? Or has this guy murdered somebody? So they have to look at what the reason for that is, and then consider all of the other environmental factors, the weather, the traffic, the number of people around, the surface of the road, all this stuff, and decide at what level. They have to have a threshold at what level we're going to call this thing off, stop chasing this vehicle, and you always try to do something else. Spike strips, radioing ahead. The use of things like spike strips can be very useful. They are wonderful when they work, and when you have time that somebody forward can deploy them in a way that will endanger or put at risk the vehicle that you want to come over there and have its tires shredded, and not other vehicles, incidents, or police. And if you know exactly where that guy is going to go. In the city, in a metro area, the use of spike strips is pretty problematic. Out in a rural area where you've got a highway or somebody who's going on one road, they're much easier to be able to deploy.
And I do just want to say this. I do live in a rural area in Mississippi. It was at night, and it was on like back roads. They were not on a main road.
And they may have been able to, I don't know if they have spike strips. If they don't, they need to get them, because if they're a sheriff's office in a rural area, they need to have spike strips. And that may have been appropriate here for you to lose a couple of tires rather than now a vehicle that's totaled.
I kind of also want to also bring up another solution that I think that could have also helped in this instance, and it also helped in general, is a lot of people, not just, you know, youth, but even adults, do not know their rights. Like, I have no idea why the boys got scared and ran. I don't know if they were just scared of the police, or they thought because his friend didn't have license. Just so everybody knows, the car was not reported stolen. I was at home. I did not even realize they had took it. But the car was not reported stolen or anything like that. So they really, the only charge that they could have really got was like driving without license and traffic tickets, which is what they ended up getting in the first place. But I feel like if we in our communities at the community center start teaching the youth from the time that they're young their rights and the laws, that they'll be more prepared for situations. Miss Sonia, what do you think? Do you think that would help? Okay, I think we lost her. Go ahead, Chief.
It's so important for people to know their rights. For example, here with us, everybody knows you have a right to a telephone call if you're detained by the police, right?
Right.
There is no such constitutional right. There's so many myths out there as to, for example, people believe, and I'm not going to go through a lot of it, but just a couple of examples that are common myths out there. People believe, for example, that you have a telephone call. Nope, there is no such right. People believe that if the officer arrests you, he has to give you your Miranda rights and tell you that you have the right to remain silent. People do that all the time, right? In all the movies, in all the shows, and everything we see, you have the right to remain silent. They have to say that. No, they don't. There is no requirement under the Fifth Amendment. That's what it is. The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. There is no requirement. Miranda versus Arizona is the case for the officers to give you your rights unless they are going to question you about the crime that you're a suspect in. Then they have to give you your rights. But if they're not going to question you, they don't have to read you your rights. Now, what's important here, and Brooke, you're absolutely correct. You are spot on. What I have found is people and even police officers do not have the information about the Constitution that they need. So many people have the mistaken idea out there about what their rights are or aren't. A lot of rights that they don't know they have, and a lot of rights that they think they have that aren't there. So you're absolutely right. Everybody needs to know more about their own rights than they currently do.
Jojo, are you still with us?
He came back with it.
You can't smash it.
No, I can't see it.
James,
No,
do you have
it's
any
really bad.
suggestions for solutions?
That's what I want to smoke that.
Somebody
I
put
think
their
it's
phone
Sonia's
on mute.
back.
What it is
Put
doing?
their phone on. If everybody put their phone on mute, we can probably hear that one person talking.
Yes, what she said, please mute if you're not talking. Miss Sonia, can you give what you think would be a good solution for the ever-growing systemic problem we have?
I like all the suggestions that were thrown out there. Mr. Chaplin, I believe that's who was speaking, to get with our elected officials, because these are the ones that, are writing these laws and putting everything into place. But, we all need to know our laws for our states, because they vary from state to state. Pretty much they're all the same, but some of them are a little different. But I live in a suburb, so we don't have spikes. But for the city part, I have never encountered anyone throwing spikes out. So that's shy of television. This was all new to me. I've heard of it. I've just never had to witness it. I've never seen it. But I think us learning our laws, or at least the basic part, helps us at an advantage when a police officer encounters us. We don't seem, because as the courts say, they don't care that we're ignorant to the law. They presume that we're supposed to know it. So as such, if they presume that we're supposed to know it, at least have some sort of knowledge of what's going on. So when you are approached by police, you can actually say, hey, I don't have that right to speak. No, I need an attorney. No, the law says that, and you can regurgitate it back to them, because when you're regurgitating back to them, they look, okay, all right, this person is a little bit more knowledgeable, so I can't play this game with that person and come across like I could just railroad them, because a lot of us are being railroaded because we don't know. So if we did take the time just to learn a little bit more about the law, it makes it a little bit more easier. I'm not saying they're still not going to arrest us or handcuff us or, take us in for anything. We may not be charged, but the simple fact of just going through those changes, having to have handcuffs on and sit in the car until they decide to pull off and, mock and tease and laugh at you. It helps just a little. That's all I have.
If you're going to do battle with the law, you got to know the laws.
Question.
You got to know what you can do, what you can't do, what they can do, what they can't do. You have to know the laws in your state, your area, your jurisdiction, or whatever. You should also know what you might. Yes, you must know. You must inform yourself. Or we must, as advocates, we must inform the people, whichever way it needs to happen.
Jojo, do you have any comments on any of this?
Yes, finally got my laptop. Thank you for being patient with me. I do apologize. I know we were asking earlier about the policies and whatnot. I put in the chat qualified immunity as being one of them, to end qualified immunity with policing. And of course, this was also in the earlier documents looking at nationals, like no knock warrants, but definitely getting to qualified immunity. Speaking about policies, I think a good bit of what we do is we talk about it a lot without actually in placing intervention methods that could be successful for community and law enforcement to engage with community or without. But despite that they have to, because they protect and serve, there needs to be less talk and more organizing. I'm not just saying within the circle we have here, but and strategies developed that are practiced to see what is a safe method for dealing with or for them to respond to calls, things of that nature. Simple things like racial profiling, which was developed in the 1980s, and it came out of Florida, and it was a practice that was used in policing. So when we talk a lot about law enforcement and policing, I mean, it is very evident to understand that it is derived from old slave catching. That's where it comes from. They would give anybody a badge to go catch anyone, and not have any, set strict standard guidelines that apply to everyone. So you take an entire system that we're talking about and that we live with and live in, that is based off of old traditional standards that people do not really abide by or find unfavorable for everyone. So in regards to that, less talk and more action would be ideal, and to really understand the, as it varies from state to state, parish to parish, borough to borough, county to county, or what have you, jurisdictions of those law enforcements, they have to abide by protocols and set certain standards. But when it abides to dealing with people specifically, there just needs to really be an evaluation that is that doesn't subdeviate to just one particular group of people, but more so for all, because that is the issue. So I definitely see that qualified immunity being one, because we're dealing with these issues in our society. When something happens, quite times, like in Mississippi, when investigations are over with and something happens, when something happens, they send the investigation, depending on how severe it is, to MBI, and they look at it, and they can't make any further comments. And people are wondering what is going on, like what happened. And then that itself is traumatizing, because it's something that, has been going on for for centuries. So, looking at that as transparency, accountability, and qualified immunity, along with other things. But going back to racial profiling, it was deemed as constitutional, because of search and seizures, things like that. So like we were saying, or like Chief was saying earlier, and someone mentioned, there are a lot of things, knowing the law, what it interprets and what it says and what it means, versus from what we think it's supposed to mean and what it does mean, could actually save some trouble, but more so educate people on knowing, what they're supposed to know as citizens.
Can I say, Wilmington, Delaware, I used to be years ago. They have an organization called Wilmington Peacekeepers. And they wear their orange t-shirts with the black writing on it. And what they do is they go out throughout the communities, at every death site. They meet up with the community, those who lost their loved ones to the streets. and they hand out little literatures about your rights, what to do, when confronted with the police. Try not to be hostile, making eye contact, just the do's and don'ts, just to avoid. I'm not saying that even if you do those things that you're still not going to be, accosted by police officers, but just, little things to help alleviate the situations, to maybe, not being arrested or detained by police officers. And I found that to be very helpful in the city of Wilmington. Now, I have not seen that in Philadelphia. I toggle back and forth, but I have not seen that in Philadelphia at all, which will be helpful, moving forward, if every organization that is out here, or activists that are out here, would have literature like that. And I know it costs a lot to print out, but if you've got access and just print out the basic, just our rights, what are the basic rights, how to conduct yourself, when a police officer, don't have your hands in your pocket, don't be loud, or, don't be, we have that right to, again, say what we want to say, as long as it doesn't come across as a threatening or confrontational, to where this officer feels though, hey, we're about to fight. But there's things you can avoid saying or doing to put yourself in a situation worse than what you probably are or wasn't going to be, if that makes any sense. So I wanted to throw that out there, because I noticed Wilmington does that, and that would help with other communities. If everyone, not every organizer, but if you can, just have those things handy to hand out, whenever you are out and about. If you are one of those boots to the ground people, that was it, and I like what he said, that they're transparent. Wilmington also is now putting body cameras on. Philadelphia has theirs. It was a big stink with Wilmington with the body cameras. They didn't want to have them at all, and there were a lot of police shootings amongst our Black, brown men and women that raised a big stink. But that's another thing that we need: body cameras that are on. Transparency between the police and the community. It seems as though when a civilian does wrong, their names, their backgrounds, the identity of that person, the release of the video is released, ASAP. When the police are at fault, we have to hem and haw, wait, all day, pulling out teeth just to get the officer's name and, what becomes of them, what happened, can we see the video? That can take, some days to weeks, and it's kind of sad that we don't get the same when it's a civilian versus when it's an officer. Immunity, police immunity, I really believe that would help, because what happens is, these officers are not being held accountable for their actions. Meaning, hey, I done shot somebody like 6-7 times, and I have this, this extended record. And now all of a sudden, I get this one person, and now you want to penalize me? Hey, what goes on here? And you have to, after a while, you get tired of keep telling them. You have to start showing them. So if you taking money out of their pocket, out of the officer's pocket, rather than the state picking up the tab, because the only person's getting, rewarded is no one. The police officers still at fault. They still have a job. They still getting paid. The city is now paying for something that they shouldn't have to pay. And at the end, no one walks away benefiting anything. I don't care how much money someone has received. You're still not benefiting anything, because the officer at 9 times out of 10 still has their job and they're still getting paid. And I believe if we start penalizing the police officer, making them held accountable, making them pay, making them make restitution, no paid vacation, because they basically that's what it is. We're going to give you a paid time off while we figure this out, especially if you know that they're wrong. There should be no paid vacations. I can't get a paid vacation if I go over my minimum, so why are they allowed to? But you're raising some great points. I just wanted to put that one out there.
I just want to say thank you to Miss J. Renee, who has popped in. I do want to get to you, but James, you were saying that you wanted to say something.
No, that's a great idea. I like that. Also, in Philadelphia, I know what is it? The in the park to try to help the people that's on the drugs in that park over there. Also, telling people their rights, the laws, and things like that. And I'm going out there sometime this summer to I want to see how they do their work because I learned by watching, and that's something they're in North Philadelphia. Matter of fact, I just want that out there.
I don't know what happened.
That's a
Chief, did you want to respond to anything that's been said?
Well, Sonia brought up a number of issues, a number of good issues and important issues. And so did JoJo. Can we get into qualified immunity and talk about that? Because that's one of the critical issues that we've talked about. We've kind of alluded to it all week. And I know it's one of the big issues out there, not only with our community, but with everybody, is a problem with qualified immunity. Can we talk about that for a minute? It's important for us to.
I would love to.
I think it's important for us to understand what qualified immunity is and what it is not. And a lot of people out there believe that police officers are not being charged with crimes in doing things because of qualified immunity. And that's not what qualified immunity covers. Qualified immunity is a legal concept in the courts, in the civil courts, that protects, for an extent, public officials, everybody elected, the delegated, whatever it is in the government, protects their personal property, homes, cars, things like that, from being at risk because of something they did on the job, unless it hits the threshold of gross negligence or a crime, which is everything we're talking about here. If we have a police officer who murders somebody, and I mean actually murders somebody, if there is no right under use of force for them to use that force, it's excessive, and that's been determined. We could talk about the process before that, but if that has already been determined, that they committed a crime or by gross negligence harmed somebody, then qualified immunity goes away. That is not there to protect that person. But if he's not been adjudicated in that way, then qualified immunity protects the personal property of that public official. It does not shield them from being charged criminally. If you have police officers who are walking because they're not being charged with something and they're being protected in that way, then that's something different than qualified immunity. Whatever, that may be somebody protecting them, it may be the thin blue line, it may be several things, but it's not qualified immunity. So I think qualified immunity is a problem, and I think it does need to be looked at. But please understand that as a chief of police, I could not affect qualified immunity. I have nothing to do with qualified immunity. The cities have nothing to do with it. It's a legal standard that comes from the Supreme Court of the United States.
I just want to make a comment about that, though, because you said if they've been adjudicated in court, but there are instances where the city is settling in civil court for somebody that has been shot by the police and has died. I'm gonna give an example. Alton Sterling, his aunt was on last night, and they settled out of court in civil court, but it was with the city. But those police officers are still, under qualified immunity. They can't sue those police officers because, like you said, they have not been adjudicated. But in the same sense, the city has agreed to wrongdoing because they have settled and gave a settlement. So why should those police officers be immune from also paying for what they did in just the city? Why should the city only be responsible?
Cities settle all the time. I had my city settle anytime we were sued, which is all the time. A police department is getting sued all the time. The chief and everybody else is named in there. The city would normally clear everybody else from there except the individuals who are directly involved in the incident, whatever it is. The cities usually turn that over to an insurance consortium or attorneys who sit and make economic decisions about it. For example, I had a case where we had a SWAT team that went in on the wrong address in a warrant. They ended up going in, kicking in the door. It was the wrong place. They knew that right away. Nobody was hurt. They withdrew. They screwed up. They clearly screwed up. The city settled, of course, with that individual who was in that home because he deserved that. He earned that. They had the wrong place. The city settled that not based on the facts of the incident, but the city settled that on the money of it because they decided that it was cheaper to settle than it was to litigate the situation. So the cities will settle based on what the insurance or the attorneys want because it's cheaper. As for the officers being at risk for that or liable for some of that, the city will normally indemnify its employees as part of an employment agreement. So the cities are protecting their employees, and that usually is an agreement with the employees.
Okay, thank you for that information. Jay Renee is back, and so is Sarah Jane. So I do want to get to Jay Renee. She hasn't had a chance to say anything yet.
Hi, thank you for giving me a chance to speak. I'm still, my connection was kind of poor, so I'm still trying to catch some of the conversation so I can see where, or what I might want to comment on. I'm glad that you gave an explanation more of qualified immunity. I think that that's something that we definitely need to understand on a better level, to understand what's going on before our eyes. But as of right now, I don't have a particular thing that I'd like to say.
Okay, Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I apologize. I missed a good portion of that. My phone service went out, but I'm home now, so I'm able to listen in a little bit better. I think Brooke and Chief, I know you've already gone off of the topic of what happened with the head-on collision in a high-speed chase. My question I was trying to ask before my service went out was, Do you, Chief, think that there are times when police officers' adrenaline kicks in before and over their rational thought in situations like that? And is that contributing to a lot of the problems that we're seeing with excessive force and the police brutality?
And I would say definitely to that, Sarah, is that we're fighting that all the time in law enforcement, is to get people to calm down and slow down, because, of course, police officers are human. The sirens get going, the lights get going, people start running around, shots fired, whatever the case may be, and they get excited. When police officers get excited, we have problems. It may be legal problems, it may be getting somebody hurt, and it may be even friendly fire they deal with between each other. But yes, definitely the adrenaline surge that comes when you get that call of there's a bank robbery in progress at such and such a place. Everybody wants to hurry up and do this and do that. And the first thing that I, as a chief or a trainer, would say, and it's counterintuitive, but slow down. Slow down and think about what you're doing. But that's a challenge that we deal with constantly, Sarah. You're spot on.
I actually had a question. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, that's okay. I was also I was at a rally last year up in upstate New York, and at that time it was brought to our attention that about 20% of crimes in action are the perpetrators actually caught in action. Do you have anything to say to that statistic that we were provided? Is it accurate?
If you're talking about the likelihood of catching somebody in the act of committing a crime?
Yes, that's correct. The 20% of actual perpetrators are caught in action, I guess. Is that a good way of putting it?
Sure. No, that's a good way of putting it. I would say that if I had a percentage that high, I'd be really, really lucky. I think realistically, it's probably more like 5% rather than 20. Because very rarely, for example, burglaries, even robberies, and it depends on the case. A domestic assault, for example, the percentage is going to be very high. Homicide, the percentage is going to be pretty high. Burglary, it's going to be very low. Robbery, it may be 10, 15, 20%. But it depends on whether it's a personally violent crime or just a property crime. But the reality is, and the point I think you're getting at, is that police officers racing to a scene, lights going, siren going, to catch somebody who has done something, very rarely do they catch them. We catch them most of the time through good investigation and good police work afterwards.
Thank you. That's a very good explanation to that. Thank you.
I had a question for Jay Renee, because you actually talked about this on Monday. How would we go about getting, the excessive force and the SOPs changed? What do we need to do as activists and as a community? Jay Renee, are you there?
Phone on mute.
Okay, would anybody else like to answer that? Does anyone else have an idea on how we can do that? Miss Sonia or James or Jojo?
What was the question again? What was the
It was
question again?
how
Go ahead,
as a
JoJo.
community and as a community and as activists, what can we do and what do we need to do in our area? Because I truly believe that reform and restructuring is going to have to come, you know, in the communities that we live in and then branch out larger. But what can we do to get the excessive force policies in our area changed and the SOPs changed?
I think a great deal of that.
We need to vote in.
I'm sorry, James.
Go
James,
ahead.
hold on one second. JoJo was talking.
All right, let him go.
No, please, by all means, go ahead, Mr. James.
We have to start voting now. We have to get the people that are behind us and want to do bring the police under control. That's what we're doing here in New York. We're doing that with the DAs. We're doing that with the governors that are running on the 22nd. We have to be more involved. We cannot just be sitting back and want to do something. We have to always be doing something. You see what I'm saying? We have to always be active. We have to be active in the politics. We have to be active in watching going on in our streets. We always have to be involved. We can't just wait till something happens and then we're getting involved. We must always stay involved at each given moment. I follow all elections. I work for the elections. I do this. I do many different things. When I first started, I only wanted to help prisoners free their mind. Then I said, I have to do more. I have to be more. And I have to do all I can. I have no limits now. There's nothing I won't do for the people. There's nowhere I won't go for the people. We have to be all inclusive. We have to be able to do everything we can plus. And when we can't do any more, we have to get someone else to help us do more. But we can never stop. Our last dying breath must be doing, whoa, what happened?
I'll say, I agree with that. Being 100% acclimated and involved, it makes a huge difference in a lot of what we do, and especially when we talk about the legislative side of policies and procedures that are pushed through state and local levels of or whatever the case may be. That is really important because we talk about just with policing it within itself in the legislative side, like Mr. James was saying, he wanted to free their minds, right? So you got the policy, policing, and the legislative side all over there. Then you have the aspect of the correctional facility or the prison, the prison complex, if you will. And then you have people on that end as well. So working our way from one end to the spectrum to the other end is a smart way to do it. So, for example, the United States has the most incarcerated people than any other country, right? And be that it may, a lot of the incarceration started, of course, when, I guess you could say the end of the Reconstruction, right? That's when they spiked. So going into that part, looking at the methodologies of the prison system and everything that has played a part into that. For one, given that going to prison, going to jail is a bad thing, is one thing that it is bad and that people see it from the outside looking in, but it's also another thing when you're actually there, because, we look at the recidivism rate and then we talk about as a country and as a people, what can we do for former inmates to help them get a leg up in society to where they will not have to go back? And simple things like starting within prison. I know this may sound crazy, but like landscaping, beautifying the area, making it look like something, making it, putting something out there. And then as those things grow, the inmates begin to go outside and they have a sense of nature. They see something for once. And, it begins to mentally change the orientation of how they perceive themselves from the outward, from inward going outward. Just simple things like that. And I know it means such a difference. But the reason why I bring that up is beautifying. I know it sounds crazy, jails and the outside of prisons, but it's a correlation to the prison to pipeline for schools. A lot of these schools, you go to their middle schools and their high schools, depending on the zip code and tax code that they live in. A lot of these schools, their outside area looks like the outside of a, without excluding the fences, of a prison system. There are no trees, no gazebos, no plants, no good grass, sod, mulch laid down, or anything like that. Just the simple things to beautification to make it look like something, right? Just that. And then also looking at the fact that there is educational courses and certain type of work courses and core corporations.
More than ever. But there's one thing you can do.
I have no idea where that's coming from.
COVID-19 vaccine.
That was probably me, but I'm sorry. Things like that. Of course, working our way into the system, because you have civilian life, people who are not in prison, are in jails, or that aren't incarcerated. They're out here, and then you have the middle, and then once, as we know it, the inmates who are in there, when they're done serving their time, they will then go back to where they were before. So what do we do at that point to decrease recidivism, right? So once again, doing those small things like Mr. James mentioned, the mentality state of working with inmates and the healthcare, and looking at what is offered to these people, because they're not treated like humans in there. And of course, slavery is not abolished in the prison system at all. It's just induced slavery, in another way. It's ambiguous. So, and then you go to policy and legislation. For example, restoring voting rights, banning the box, things like this. All of these things are important to really galvanize around and restoring voting rights to these people who were once former inmates that are now back into civilian life, when it's a circle, a cycle that goes around and around and around like a wheel, right? And then we go to that other part of policing, so what does police training look like? Do they have diversity courses, ethic courses? Do they actually, how many of these police officers live in impoverished communities or low-income communities, and these are the same communities that they police and patrol? You know what I'm saying? They're not there. Am I saying that they should be there? No, I'm not. But we see that they're not in that part. And I was looking at a study, right, that I found, resulting in shootings, since 2005 up until 2019. A study finds that, this is from Bowling Green, that 104 study shows that there have been 104 officers, and this stops at 2019, that were, considered that they were convicted for the crimes that they committed, but arrested, but only 4, were convicted for murder. And we talk about immunity, right? And this is a study from Bowling Green. So we talk about immunity and transparency and accountability, but there isn't any accountability for law enforcement, for policing, for the entire system that is sworn to protect and serve us. And a lot of times I won't say we can't fault those, but at the same time, it's not more so putting fault toward them, but it's more so putting fault toward the system, because there's a system that is broken that we expect people to fix when they're operating in a system that has been in place for centuries, and no one's really taking the urge or the time to really get it straightened out or get it fixed. But it's only a matter of time until someone who's in control of all of these things lose a loved one, or something tragic happens to when they decide that now it's time to really go and make changes. And that's when changes get made for some apparent odd reason, right? No matter, a lot of times we do push for change through works of advocacy, protesting, activism, etc., come in large numbers and do what we're supposed to do. That works in great numbers. But be that it may, when it comes to voting and when it comes to those who are in power, that is who who has a say so in a lot of these things. That is where a lot of the change comes into play. But there's just so much corruptness within the system to where even those who want to do the good work of a law enforcement are overshadowed by the evil and the bad things that happen within that department. And it's a sad thing that it does happen. But once again, be that it may, it is a system that we look at from the civilian perspective to those who are now incarcerated, even for petty crimes, for things that they didn't commit, being sentenced to death row. They're given 15 to 25 to life, depending on the state that you're in. And then looking at the fact of policy and legislature, what are we doing to really help these inmates? Nothing, because our country knows that a good, valuable means of its resource and work comes from the prison systems, because a lot of other institutions benefit from free labor. So, I mean, be that it may, I don't think that in overnight, and possibly maybe within even a year, that a lot of the policing system and structure will change, because that once again is an idea, right? And even though things may change with qualified immunity, no knock warrants, banning chokeholds, racial profiling, etc., things may change, but that idea of what it was meant to be will always be there, right? So, and then we talk about reform and defunding the police. It's as a young black male, to me, every day defunding the police sounds a lot better than reform or having it, because we're paying, our tax dollars are being paid, in my opinion, how I see it, is for some of these officers go out here and terrorize and traumatize the community over and over and over by withholding information, by setting up unnecessary roadblocks, by over policing events in the South. We have Black Spring Break, and then you have Cruising the Coast. They will guarantee hands down over police and shut down one lane of Highway 90 and leave it for Black Beach, and there would be police squad cars, trucks set up in Edgewater Mall parking lot and all down the strip for 26 miles, just about, almost, if you can, right? And with that, you go to Cruising the Coast, it's just as if it never happened. So there is that comparison of how people of color are treated versus Caucasian and white people in this country. It's plain as day. So,
hey Jojo, I have a quick question for you. So going back to what you were saying about the prisons, a lot of people don't understand, like where you were saying profits, that the 13th Amendment did not actually abolish slavery. All it did was gave an exception clause, because it started back in the Jim Crow era when they had the or I'm sorry, not the Jim Crow era. That's when isn't that when they started putting a lot of people in prison? But it started back in like when slavery ended. They started the Black Codes. Am I correct on that? And that's how a lot of brown and Black people ended up being in prison, and then poor white people. And it's still like that. People think that the 13th Amendment actually abolished it completely, but there is only a certain amount of states that have taken it out of the state constitution, and the federal constitution still has that exception clause that slavery and involuntary servitude is prohibited, except for a crime, for punishment.
Right.
But I also had another question for you about defunding the police. Can you please explain what you mean by defunding the police? Because I think a lot of people has misconceptions when we say defund the police. They think we're saying like a lawless country where there is no law enforcement officers. But I don't believe that's what you're saying. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, definitely not a lawless country. We look at certain things that, like, there are certain things that people in the military can't do that police officers and law enforcement have done. That, you know, and this is not me saying this. This is on behalf of those who do serve and who have served, that are outraged at the fact that they need certain information to do what they need to do to carry on a mission overseas. But when it comes to the policing in our country, how it is militarized, and the equipment and gear that they have, and the tactics that are used, and how they go about doing certain things, the question is like, okay, what are we missing here? Like, you know, I don't understand how come, you know, they kill someone or someone is killed. Yeah, they kill someone and that person is dead by the hands of the police, and then they get administrative paid leave. That doesn't make sense to me. You know, doctors don't even get that if someone dies during surgery, right? And it's possible a total accident. You know, being a police officer isn't even, you know, without any disrespect to any officer, but it's not even considered the most dangerous job in the United States. Tree logging is cutting trees down, right? And other things before that. So when we talk about defunding, you know, when last year's protests, you know, we see where there was law enforcement that brought out like heat ray guns that they were, you know, using against protesters. Any type of level of law enforcement jurisdiction, whatever the case may be, policing. Certain military gear, you know, and I say military gear because that's what it appears to be. You know, more guns than good God knows. We talk about defunding. Also, things that we mentioned earlier, you know, when these things happen, you know, they have pensions still, they have insurance still, right? We also talk about more so as when that money is defunded. And once again, every place throughout the country really cannot afford to defund the police simply out of financial means, but also as an affordability for measures of environmental activity in their ecological system. So, for example, a place in Macomb, Mississippi may be different from Champaign, Ohio. Illinois, right? So policing is going to look different wherever we go in different parts of this country. So be that it may, it in some sense that will have to be condensed, and it should be condensed down to certain spectrums of the country. But once again, it will have to go on a very national level of how that looks. So when we talk about defunding, training that they receive, you know, what training isn't working, you know, we should take away from that, because apparently the training that they are receiving isn't helping. But then again, I question that theory, because we've seen white men in this country go out and commit multiple mass shootings, and they come back alive. They're even taken out to get something to eat, to have dinner. You know, they're treated with a certain inch of respectability, if you would say. So when we talk about, you know, things like defunding, you know, we're also looking at the nature in which what strategies are being used, that we need to take money away, what trainings aren't working that we need to take away, or once again re-implement. There need to be more cultural exclusivity training, intersectionality training, what have you. The gear that is used, cars that they have, you know, all of these things that they have that we pay for. So we look at that end of within policing, and also once again tactics and strategy used. So when we go to also mention defunding the police, a lot of people go more towards the words of reform, right? So finding out, and when we talk about reform and defund, all that's really saying is that let's take money away from the departments and find other ways we can implement these monies into our communities, to where heavy police presence isn't required, or very much so not needed, because it's not working. It hasn't been working since since the end of the Reconstruction era, right? Since after the Civil War. So it hasn't been working at all. So when we talk about defund, that's what we're talking about, is we take this money away. We don't want to completely strip away the title of policing in the community. And this is for me. So, and this is what we as an organization have agreed on, right? So we need to find other ways that we can take that money and put it into something that is more beneficial, that could also help policing in our communities and in our country. So that way they won't have to always respond. And I'm pretty sure every time they get a call, it's the worst thing comes to mind. And I hate that that happens, but it's just how it is. It's how the cookie crumbles in the world. You know, I'm pretty sure induced stress for police officers as soon as they punch the clock for 12 to 24 hours is extremely high. I can get that. You know, who knows what is going to happen, right? But at the same time, you know, that is not the perspective people in the community have, because the first thing we think is, I call, my issues are should be resolved in a timely manner, and no one should be killed, shot, or hurt, or hospitalized. And that is definitely not the case. So when we talk about defunding, you know, the more, like I say, the more Black people that are being killed, people of color that are being killed, but people in general that are being killed, yeah, we probably need to talk about, you know, finding a way to take some money away from the certain police departments and putting them elsewhere into the community, because we can't keep taking loss like this when only people of color make up, African Americans by statistics only make up 13.46% of the population. So, you know, there has to be some give or take at this point in time.
Thank you for that, JoJo. Jay Renee, are you still with us? Miss Sonia, did you want to say anything?
One of the things that was when defunding the police came into play was it wasn't to not fund the police. It was to take some of the funds that we used to give them and utilize them within the community, because a lot of these police officers that are shooting some of these people are shooting those with mental illness. One point made is that there are a lot of families who are calling the police. Philadelphia had one, I believe, January, young lady. If I'm not mistaken, the young lady had, the mother actually called the police, or actually called for some assistance for her son. And the police were called. And when they were called, they literally shot the son in front of everyone. Her stink was, they had came there. So it's not like they didn't know he suffered mental illness, because they were there 2 days prior. So these same officers were fully aware that this young man in question was suffering from mental illness, but instead the best scenario was to open fire on the young man who was charging at them. I've seen, like, you know, the gentleman just said, I've seen many police officers who would otherwise have someone run after them with a knife and or a gun and run. They are literally running from the perpetrator. They're running from the perpetrator. They're taking them, as he said, out to get a meal because, you know, he seemed hungry. But yet when it comes to melanin complexion people, the first tactic is to shoot and kill. So part of the funding was to put out for mental health resources, so that we're not always calling the police for mental health illnesses. We're calling for someone to come out who is qualified and trained in that mental health field to come out and alleviate whatever the issue is between the perpetrator and whoever the victim is, rather than calling the police and taking the chance on becoming killed. That was one of the things that was raised when it came to defunding, because a lot of people are crying foul, hey, we don't have these resources. I believe every city and state is a little different. There are some, you know, again, I'm only speaking, you know, within my tri-state. There are some, it's just a matter of us knowing, just like our rights, us knowing where they are, who to call. Do you have a 211 or 311 or whatever it is, accessible to call and say, hey, let me call these people rather than calling the police. But that was one of the things when it came to defunding the police. That was one of the issues, or not issues, but one of the suggestions that was raised when it came to that. And a lot of people took out of it when we say defund the police, we're going to shut down the police stations. That's going to be impossible because a lot of people are committing crimes. We need the police. But at the same token, we need police officers who are going to do, and again, I'm not a police officer, but we need police officers who are going to uphold the law and act accordingly and not just come out like savage beasts and just unleash on people, especially of melanin complexion, just because just because is not a reason. Again, we've seen countless times where someone has walked away after shooting somebody and there's not a bump or scratch on them. They're being escorted, handcuffed, and put into police cars nicely and gently, whereas though we on the other hand aren't. But our elected officials, someone raised a question about waiting, getting out and voting. You don't have to wait for election time. You actually have people who are already in office. So what we do is they come to us because this is their job, and they say, hey, I need you to hire me. And you have to start reminding these people that, hey, I don't want to see you just on election time. You did ask me to hire you to do a job for me. And as such, I'm the one that's asking you to do your job since I got you into office. I'm the one that can get you out of office. So we don't need to wait for them to be out of office. We can already get them while they're already in office. Now, the ones that are leaving, and this is probably their last term, that's okay. But the ones that are already in office or coming into office, you need to start hounding them daily, profusely, until, hey, they don't have a choice but to listen. Because you got to remember, they work for us. They are elected officials because we are their constituents, which means that they are out here to serve us. And you can't serve us if you don't hear us and know what us wants and needs.
Hey, and I agree with you on that. Can I say something real quick? I'm sorry. May I have the floor? I'm sorry.
I'm done.
I do agree with that. That's just like if you go to a restaurant and you get something to eat, right? And they don't make your order how you asked for it, you're going to take it back because you paid them for a service that they're supposed to do, right? It's just the same thing. We need to take a lot of stuff back and get it done right, because it shouldn't result in the life of death. And I think the thing that really upset me the most when as being involved as being a board member for Black Lives Matter Mississippi, we adhere to the needs of the family at any cost. And when when LaMelo Parker, the 3-month-old infant baby that was killed, we went to visit the family when they had the wake and funeral service. Not one officer from any department showed up to offer the family apology, to say that we are sorry this happened to you, to at least show a presence. And I'll be honest, when these things happen, no officer ever shows up. But if an officer is killed and the line of duty, depending, like no matter what it is, officers will come support that fallen brother in droves from different states if they have to. But when they kill someone, it's like the total opposite. It's an apathetic gesture is what it is to me, what I see. And I just don't understand that, and especially if it's incidental. But once again, a lot of these cases in which that we look at, I really find it complexing, unincidental, because within the system within a policing system, that's a train, but within a policing system, of course, you have a good old boy system within it. You know, people who are a part of these domestic terrorist groups, you know, neo-Nazi clans and KKK were also involved as sheriffs, state troopers, and policing, and have had generations in these type of things. So there's once again the idea that it's still there. And it's just how things have happened. Even before we were born, these things should have been taken care of before we got here, but they weren't. So we're left behind cleaning up a mess that is going to take a while to clean up, that should have been cleaned up before us. And I agree with you, Miss Jones, like you say, and living in the area that, you know, of course, tri-state area that you live in, you know, everything's definitely going to look different, but we got mental health issues that are to the roof, sky high, because, you know, and I'm not being modest when I say this. I'm being sincerely, you know, honest, is that slavery taught Black people how to survive, but it never taught us how to live. So when you have generations buried behind that, and that even includes along the lines of marginalized and people of color, poor white people as well, are all abiding within the same system, pitting against each other, when it shouldn't be that way at all, because they too are under the same belt of oppression that we're under. It's just that we get it the most is because the society has to have someone at the bottom of the totem pole, and that's in every society. So when you look at the mental health aspect of that, you know, and you got people living in abject poverty, literally, you know, barely any roofs, probably not a doorknob on their back door, maybe working 3 jobs, you know, stuck in a system of welfare and governmental assistance. You know, like, it doesn't help you understandably so, and it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that they're having a hard life right now, some life stressors that could really be simply solved with having better access to resources, healthcare, education, and chances for opportunity and financial opportunity as well. Because I tell you now, Mississippi is ranked number 47 in economic opportunity, and they now are trying to figure out what must they do to keep their college graduates, because everyone is leaving. And I hope soon that won't be me, that I can find a way to make a difference in this state. But if not, deuces. But at the same time, this is just the world we live in, that needs more than tender loving care. It needs that transparency, accountability, and the due justice that needs to be served for everyone.
I agree completely with what you're saying. Sarah, I'm actually about to ask you a question, because there is something I want you to touch on that Sonia had said. I just want to say what Jojo was saying is I definitely agree with everything you were saying. And one of the things that I'm really big on is community policing. And what I mean by that is the officers actually being involved in the community that they're serving, getting to know the population that they're serving. I truly believe that could help. Well, you know, I'm wrong, because at the point of this mistrust, I'm not sure that it would help. But I do see, like in Arkansas, there's an officer down there who has a true good relationship with his community, and they actually trust him. But what I had for you, Sarah, was Sonia was talking about mental health. And I do want to say, in Ohio, where I'm from, they actually have crisis units. And I know me and you have talked about this before. And a lot of people don't know about the mental health crisis units, that you can call them before calling the police. Sometimes they do have to call the police for assistance, but they're also there to, you know, to help facilitate how the encounter should go. Can you just tell us more about that, since you are a therapist?
Yeah, I would love to. You know, both Jojo and Sonia made some really great points in regards to the mental health aspect of this. And as they were talking about defunding the police, you know, I often use the term defund the police, refund the community. And what that means to me is, you know, money is reallocated to appropriate services, which we all know mental health is, you know, not top of the list of getting funding. Luckily, there's a lot of great grants out there that keep these programs up and running. But at the same time, you know, there are mental health facilities, mental health companies that, you know, fail miserably at managing money. You know, that situation just happened down here on the coast of Mississippi, where the mental health company drove themselves into the ground. And luckily, another company up a little bit north in the Pine Belt area stepped in and said, "Hey, you know what? We're gonna help take care of this issue." And it is probably one of the best things that has happened to. Sorry, my dog is all over my lap now that I'm talking. Now that a more reputable company has taken over, it's increased the services that are available. I know for a fact that a lot of these, a lot of the police officers down here, they just completed their first crisis intervention training down here on the coast with a group of police officers. And Pine Belt, that is one thing that they are amazing at doing, is providing that SIT training. It doesn't mean it's always going to work, especially if a SIT officer is not called out to the scene. But they are finding that SIT training is reducing the cost of some of the brutality that is going on. And as far as the crisis center, the crisis units, yes, there are many phone numbers out there that can be called. And we often highly encourage people calling those phone numbers before you call 911. Because if we can't help you, then we're going to direct you to call 911. But 9 out of 10 times, we can help coordinate, even if it is to help coordinate, bring a SIT officer out to the scene. We can help coordinate those services, the crisis services needed for every situation. But if we're not called, we don't know. We can't help. Now, I do know for a fact, just because it's it's something that I do. We call it pre-eval screening to determine if somebody is required to be committed or not. Those calls have actually increased, which I don't know. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, hopefully it's a good thing, because we're the ones that are intervening on this. Before we go and get the police involved, we're able to really assess the situation and see what's going on before we get the police involved. After we make that assessment, it goes to the county court, and then the county court sends it out to police officers if that person needs to be picked up. And that there's still some flaws in that system. When I went and spoke at the SIT training and asked the officers what they do, some of them actually said they take them to jail. Well, that's not what we want to see happening. We don't want these people going to jail. We don't want them involved with the law enforcement piece of it. Yes, sometimes it's needed to pick somebody up who's not going to go willingly, but we don't want them in jail. That's not going to help them. So I always highly encourage people calling the county numbers, the state numbers, even the national numbers. If you call the national numbers, and unfortunately I don't have any of those on me right now. I do have some presentations with all that information, all those resources on it. But even a lot of times when you call the national hotlines, it transfers to at least somewhere in the same state that you're in. So I don't know if that answers your question, Brooke.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much for that. And it is starting to get late, so I do want to go ahead and end this. But I do want to give Chief Gordon a chance to respond to everything before we end.
Oh, thank you, Brooke. I would just say that I think this is so important for people to get together in a collaborative type of environment like this, because we have all kinds of different ideas here and all kinds of different people on both sides, if I can say that. And it's so important that we get out there with our communities, and whether it's federal elections or local meeting, doing community oversight groups, making sure that if you want things like body cams, personally, I think every police officer in the United States should have a body cam. Every police car should have a dash cam. And to do that, it's important for people to get together, talk like this, and collaborate with each other to get these things done. I want to thank everybody here. All of you guys have done a wonderful job to come together and talk about it, get this stuff out, see what we can do, and try to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss J. Renee, are you still with us? Is your service better?
Yes, I'm still here in the service. It's touch and go, but I also want to thank everybody for the efforts that we put forward, and I definitely want to piggyback on the last gentleman and say, you know, these things are needed, and the fact that we all come from different walks of life and can come together and try to formulate some plans is a really good thing. We have to make sure that we continue to talk, though. Like, even though this event is over, we still have to, I would say, stay in touch and talk and figure out, you know, what we're trying to do. I heard a lot of mention of Wilmington. We finally do have body cams, which is very important, because if you look at the history of Wilmington and Newcastle County Police, a lot of the same officers are involved in shooting. So we're hoping that these body cams can assist us at, you know, helping people stay alive, or at least getting justice when the wrong things happen. I want to say thank you for having me on this platform. And if anyone is interested in seeing the slides that I did on escalation of force, just let me know and I'll email it to you. And thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I would like to say that the National Plus Coalition is in the process of forming an emergency response team. We do plan on having 4 different regions. Please contact us if you have any questions or would like to be a part of that and assist. We can answer any questions and kind of go further in detail about that. So again, to all of our speakers, all of our hosts this week, we truly appreciate all of you, and I hope everyone has a good night.
Enjoy your weekend, everyone. Thank
you. Happy Juneteenth. See y'all later.
Stay safe.